We're putting the harshest, strongest, most stringent sanctions on Iran. The fact that we were able to get them out so soon was really a tribute to a lot of things, including a certain process that's taking place right now. On June 12th, in Singapore, I'll be meeting with Kim Jong-un to pursue a future of peace and security for the world, for the whole world. We're going to set the table. We're going to make a great deal for the world, for North Korea, for South Korea, for Japan, for China.
Welcome to this special edition of Hannity, Trump's Big Week. I'm Jason Chaffetz in for Sean. Without a doubt, over the past few days, we witnessed history in the making. From the Middle East to the Korean Peninsula to right here at home. This week, the Trump administration saw consequential progress all over the world. Starting on Tuesday, when President Trump pulled the United States out of the one-sided, highly flawed Iranian nuclear deal.
The Iranian regime is the leading state sponsor of terror. The deal allowed Iran to continue enriching uranium and, over time, reach the brink of a nuclear breakout. This disastrous deal gave this regime, and it's a regime of great terror, many billions of dollars, some of it in actual cash. Today, we have definitive proof that this Iranian promise was a lie. Therefore, I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
Up next on Wednesday, more major progress in the Middle East. According to reports, American and Iraqi intelligence forces captured 5 senior members of ISIS, including the top aide to Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. The Trump administration also saw major progress surrounding its push for peace on the Korean Peninsula. Early Thursday morning, our prayers were answered. 3 Americans, long held captive in North Korea, were released and landed at Joint Base Andrews. Now President Trump's summit with Kim Jong-un is moving forward. Last night, at a rally in Indiana, President Trump previewed his historic upcoming meeting. Take a look.
And on June 12th, in Singapore, I'll be meeting with Kim Jong-un to pursue a future of peace and security for the world, for the whole world. But you remember everybody in the fake news where they were saying, he's going to get us into a nuclear war. He's going to get us into a nuclear war. And you know what gets you into nuclear wars? And you know what gets you into other wars? Weakness. Weakness. I think it's going to be a very big success. But my attitude is, and if it isn't, it isn't. Okay? If it isn't, it isn't. But, and you have to have that because you don't know. We're not going to be walked into an Iran deal where the negotiator, John Kerry, refused to leave the table. Obama, President Obama. Paid $1.8 billion for hostages. You, not me, you, last night you saw it. And again, it's leading to some very big things. And I think that Kim Jong-un did a great service to himself, to his country by doing this. But those hostages came out with respect. We didn't pay for them. We're going to set the table. We're going to make a great deal for the world, for North Korea, for South Korea, for Japan, for China.
Joining us now with reaction is Fox News national security strategist Sebastian Gorka, GOPAC chairman David Avella, and former Obama economic advisor Austin Goolsbee. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. Austin, I want to start with you. The president deserves some credit, doesn't he? The hostages coming home, movement on North Korea, capturing ISIS leaders. These are all good developments for the United States.
Yeah, those two, I not only have no problem, I think he does deserve credit. And I just don't want him to get the United States into an unnecessary war. And if you look at Korea, he's got some unconventional diplomacy, and thus far it seems to be working. So I think he deserves applause for that. And the capturing the ISIS leaders, I think also he deserves applause for that. The Iran deal, I'm sure we're going to get into. I think all of our allies, plus by a 2-to-1 margin, the American people believe that it's a bad mistake to pull out of the Iran deal.
I don't know where you come up with 2-to-1, because, you know, the number one thing you need to have, the number one thing that you have to have is verification. And we don't have that. You can't go anywhere, anytime to go verify it. So let me go to Sebastian Gorka. How do you see this Iranian deal playing out? And how do you think, what move next do we see Iran making?
Well, within minutes of the president killing the JCPOA as he had to, I wrote in The Hill that we now follow the North Korea playbook. We use the Pyongyang method. With Nikki Haley, with the State Department, with the president leading the way, we put the squeeze on North Korea, and they caved, and they came to the negotiating table. We do exactly the same thing with Iran, and guess what? The Europeans will follow the president's lead. We impose on them the toughest sanctions package the world has ever seen until they start behaving like a normal country, or a quasi-normal country once again.
David, let me go to you. The Democrats, this puts them in a box. They were so much flailing about what President Trump was doing, and you heard everybody saying it was going to lead to all this catastrophe. But this success, how did the Democrats, I know you're with GOPAC, but how did the Democrats react to this?
Well, we saw how they were going to react this week. But first, let's keep in mind that President Trump made it a magnificent week for 3 American hostages, and he made it a miserable week for Chuck Schumer, because just as you pointed out, he has put Chuck Schumer in a box. All we could hear from Chuck Schumer this week was how bad this was that we got the hostages out. And Austin talks about the 2-to-1 against this deal. Well, one of the ones who didn't want to get in this deal, he will remember, was Chuck Schumer, who didn't want this Iran deal in the first place. Now we don't know where he's going to be. In fact, Chuck Schumer had such a horrible week, you wonder if he's trying to get his own wing in the political hall of shame. It was disgraceful how he acted this week.
Now, Austin, let me give you a chance to react to this. But, you know, the Republicans from Ronald Reagan now to Donald Trump have always believed in peace through strength. What is it that the Democrats actually believe in?
Well, wait a minute. You're trying to change the subject off of Donald Trump. Let's make it about Chuck Schumer, make it about something else. In North Korea, as I said,
I didn't. I said, what is the Democrats' belief on this? What is the Democrats' belief on it?
The Democrats do not want us to get into a shooting war with the Iranians. We already blew $2 trillion on the second Iraq war. And you have John Bolton advocating very aggressive military-style action against them. You have all of our allies, who are the people that we need to enforce sanctions against Iran, that we had when we put in place the agreement. When we unilaterally pull out of the agreement, we now cannot convince the other trading partners of Iran to impose those sanctions. So we can't put in place the tough sanctions that will bring them to their knees. It's not possible. And we are encouraging Saudi Arabia to now get into a nuclear arms race with Iran, because as they start building centrifuges and enriching uranium again, the Saudis have to do the same. So it's a very dangerous game to play.
And Sebastian Gorka, let me go to you, because also playing into this political hotbed is what's going on in Jerusalem as we make the move to make the capital, or to make the embassy there in Jerusalem. How does this play into the whole dynamic in the Middle East?
It is a complete tectonic shifting of the geopolitics of the region. Think about, thanks to the president, thanks to the Riyadh speech, thanks to his killing the JCPOA Iran deal, we have countries like Saudi Arabia that are now allies of Israel. And what Austin said about, well, this is going to presage and result in war. You don't prevent a war by releasing $140 billion to a regime that is the biggest sponsor of terrorism in the world and sign a deal with them that actually means they can get nuclear weapons after 7 years. That's not how you prevent a war. And I'm going to tell Austin right now on live television across the country, the European nations will follow our lead and they will join us in crippling sanctions. You can take that to the bank, Austin.
Austin, do you think that's true? Are they going to? Do you think the
no,
European
of course
allies?
it's not true.
Well, what do you think they're going to do?
Just watch.
What are they going to do without the United States?
Right.
When you say without the United States, they're going to commence trading with Iran. What is the United States going to do?
Not.
Shut down and launch a trade war against China and Canada
at the
and
risk
Mexico
of trading
and Europe
with
at the
America?
same time?
No,
Not
so Sebastian,
happening.
let Austin, let's finish that thought, but I still haven't heard him answer the question of, do you believe in peace through strength? Nobody wants a shooting war. But the other thing is, our allies in Europe, who are relying upon the United States for pretty much everything in terms of safety and security, how can they not follow our lead? And then, Austin, I also want you to dive into the opening up of our embassy in Jerusalem.
Okay, you got two different ones going there. In my opinion, that Iran has already announced that they're going to recommence industrial-style enriching of uranium is going to lead to a nuclear proliferation and arms race of other Middle Eastern countries. Saudi Arabia and Iran are direct regional competitors. So if Iran immediately starts trying to get a nuclear weapon again, the Saudis will have to do the same. That's why all of our NATO allies, plus in the polling a 2-to-1 majority of Americans, all the Democrats and a significant number of Republicans think that the president has made a mistake doing this. Now, I'll applaud him on North Korea. I think the president is doing a good job exploring diplomacy. With Iran, we preemptively shot ourselves in the foot, and unfortunately, I think we're going to see that play out.
No, I think you're totally wrong. I think the unconventional approach from Donald Trump in peace through strength, I think the world understands that when Donald Trump speaks and that he means business about that. Now, David, I want to give you a chance to weigh in on what's going on in Jerusalem. This is a major move. It's a major shift. And the proximity with Syria and the Iranians and what's going on there, how do you read that?
Well, another position that Chuck Schumer was for, as has every American president over the last couple of decades been for, which is moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. But, you know, listening to Austin talk, it's not surprising to a position for the Democrats that John Kerry goes running over to Iran to try to keep a deal going. It's almost like the schoolboy who kept giving money so he didn't get beat up by the bully, and now he's running over and giving him more money to say, hey, don't tell people I was giving you money not to beat me up. This is absurd. The Democrats' position is we've got to appease Iran so they won't go beat up people in the region. Who's for us getting out of the Iran deal? Other Middle Eastern countries who don't want Iran to be a nuclear threat and use it to threaten them.
Gentlemen, thank you for this evening. I appreciate your insight. There is a lot more to discuss on this. We could do a whole show on how outrageous John Kerry's actions have been there in the Middle East, trying to undermine the strength of the United States and what the president is trying to do in that region. But gentlemen, thank you again for joining us. Coming up, Kim Strassel is out with a stunning new piece asking if the FBI planted a mole inside the Trump campaign. Plus, Congressman Trey Gowdy and John Ratcliffe join us. Stay with us. Welcome back to this special edition of Hannity, Trump's Big Week. While President Trump continues to make huge foreign policy gains in the Korean Peninsula and beyond, the Mueller witch hunt continues at home. Kimberly Strassel at the Wall Street Journal is out with a bombshell new piece titled, "What About That FBI Source? Did the Bureau Engage in Outright Spying Against the 2016 Trump Campaign?" Joining me now to explain more from the Wall Street Journal is the author of that piece, Kim Strassel. Kim, thank you so much for joining us. Give us the quick synopsis of what you've found and why this is so pivotal and so unusual at this setting.
Well, look, up until last week, all we knew was that House Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes had initiated a new line of inquiry and was demanding new documents from the Department of Justice. But then, in their desire to make Chairman Nunes look bad and justify why they were not giving those documents, someone in the government leaked a lot of details about what was happening. It turns out he's asking about a top secret government source who has worked for the FBI and the CIA, who is a U.S. citizen, would seem to have some sort of entanglement with foreign intelligence agencies, or maybe is based overseas. And based on all those breadcrumbs and some reporting, I've got a pretty good sense of who it is, and it does look as though indeed there was an FBI attempt, a successful one, to basically go out and spy with a human asset on the Trump campaign.
Now, what about the timing, right? The timing about all of this is critical. Do we understand the timing, and what are the implications for that?
Yeah, it's so important because remember, the FBI has been doggedly sticking with this story, that what initiated this counterintelligence probe was a tip that they got in July about this supposed drunken conversation of a junior campaign aide named George Papadopoulos. Well, if for any reason we find out that this person, this asset of theirs, was in fact surveilling or spying on the Trump campaign prior to that time, then they've got an issue, right? Because that's no longer their origin story. And they must have had something else that they were basing this on, whether it be the dossier or some other information that they were using as a reason to go out and surveil the Trump campaign.
Now, how are we going to figure out the solution to this? I mean, every time Trey Gowdy and Devin Nunes and others go over to the Department of Justice, they get the stiff arm, even though there's subpoenas in place. How do they actually figure this out?
You know, we have a great piece in the Journal today by a former FBI officer just talking, and his job was, in fact, to fulfill congressional requests, talking about how obnoxious and outrageous it is that the Department of Justice is not complying with simple requests, much less subpoenas from Congress. And the fact, by the way, that they didn't give this information over to Chairman Nunes all the way last year when he said he was investigating the FBI's conduct is really pretty striking. But look, they're going to have to, Congress as a body, and the good news is Chairman Nunes looks to have the backing of all the leadership and the other members in the Republican Party, make it clear that if the Department of Justice does not turn this over, that they will move to contempt. And with any luck, also, the White House is putting out the message that they need to cooperate and hand over documents.
But I thought the White House was actually backing up the Department of Justice at this point, weren't they?
Well, it's interesting. The Department of Justice made quite a big deal in its letter back to Chairman Nunes about how it had this had all been done in consultation with the White House. But curiously, it did agree to sit down with Chairman Nunes, and I think probably they have the order to accommodate him in some way. They're still trying to do it without getting out of having to hand over actual documents. But as that is what Chairman Nunes and others are actually after, it would seem that's what they're going to need to hand over to fulfill that request.
Yeah, you know what? I, as one who's actually been over to the Department of Justice and sat in those meetings and listened to these blowhards tell me how Congress has no right to see this stuff, and I got to tell you, it really is offensive. And at what point does the Constitution actually come into play? I mean, they give lip service to oversight, but here they are leaking. I mean, it's pretty well documented that they're leaking. But what is it that they think they can't and shouldn't show to Congress, which is essentially the American people?
Look, you know this better than anyone. We have processes in place whereby Congress gets to oversee the executive branch. They can't just say, give us everything. They have to have specific cause, reason, things that they're looking for. And as this piece we ran today made clear, when those cases came up, the Department of Justice has always helped and been good about it. And we also have processes whereby, in particular, the Gang of Eight, right? The senior members of our intelligence committees, the leadership, can see anything in a classified situation. So any arguments that this should be off limits are completely bogus, and people should read them for what they are, which is an attempt by the Department of Justice and the FBI, it would seem, to protect something that they simply don't want people to know because it might prove embarrassing.
Yeah, and that's really at the heart of it. It proves embarrassing. And I got to tell you, from my vantage point, having been there, every member of Congress, both sides of the aisle, by the way, ought to be standing behind Devin Nunes and Trey Gowdy and John Ratcliffe and those investigators that are going in there, Senator Grassley, for instance. But Kim Strassel is a great piece in the Wall Street Journal. She's one of the best writers out there and best reporters. So thank you for joining us tonight. And thanks for that great piece that you put out. Also yesterday, House Intelligence Chairman, the committee chairman, Devin Nunes, and House Oversight Committee Chairman Trey Gowdy, they actually went to the Department of Justice to view documents they have been requesting and that were under subpoena for months. But sources tell Fox News that Nunes and Gowdy were only briefed about the documents, that another meeting is scheduled next week for them to actually see it. But the best way to get the answer is to talk to somebody who was in that meeting. That's Chairman Trey Gowdy. And from the House Judiciary Committee, Congressman John Ratcliffe of Texas. Both are former federal prosecutors. Both have been in the system. Both have been through this process. And I thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this beautiful Friday night. Chairman Gowdy, did you get a lot of lip service? Did you actually get to read the documents? And what did they tell you?
You know, Jason, it was a really productive meeting yesterday. I think every question I asked, the Bureau and the department now understand they're relevant, the material, they're specific, they're pointed, and there's a reason that Congress wants to know the answers to these questions. So it was a really constructive, I know that is not good news from the media standpoint, that we had a boring, constructive meeting yesterday, but that's exactly what it was. And it was so constructive that we've agreed to meet next week. So you ask if we saw something. I can learn with my ears and I can learn with my eyes. And yesterday was important because I got to hear the department's perspective, but also got to ask questions. You're right. Johnny and I were prosecutors. I know the questions to ask in an investigation like this, and I need witnesses there that can answer them. Yesterday was really productive.
But when do you actually get to see them?
Well, let me say this. I've worked in all three branches of government, and there is tension. There's intentional tension put between the branches. There are lots of things that happen in the judicial branch that members of Congress can't see. There are things that happen in the executive branch that members of Congress can't see, and there are things we do, Jason, as you recall, in Congress that we don't let anybody else see. So that tension we've got to work through. I learned information this week. I still would like to see the documents. I think they've taken that request under advisement, and I think we're getting farther taking this approach, meeting eyeball to eyeball as opposed to exchanging letters and seeing who can leak them the quickest. That is not constructive. What is constructive is to have a conversation, and I think we're making progress towards accessing the documents.
Well, it's a shame that Nunes had to, issue a subpoena and threaten contempt. And the Southern gentleman of Trey Gowdy is coming out, but I'm glad you're making incremental progress step by step. I want to go to John Ratcliffe, I want to get your perspective on James Comey, because he's fresh off a book tour. He's said an awful lot of things, and we've learned a lot more about Director Comey. Has he made the situation better or worse for himself after this book tour and the things that we've learned about his actions while he was the FBI director?
Well, Jason, good to be with you. I think one of the things that has come out of Jim Comey's interviews on his book tour and the release of his secret memos is it's ironic to me that he's the one that created the allegation of obstruction of justice against Donald Trump, and now he's the same person who has effectively torpedoed the ability of the special counsel to ever prove obstruction. And I say that because the 15 pages of secret memos never mention obstruction of justice a single time. And in fact, one of the memos does exactly the opposite. It says that it's an admission by the former director that President Trump asked him to fully investigate whether or not anyone with the Trump campaign was colluding with the Russians. It's why Trey and I have both referred to that memo as Defense Exhibit A in any charges that would be brought against Donald Trump. But I think he's also hurt the Mueller case and the ability to prove that. You can't build a case around a star witness who has damaged his own credibility and hurt his own reputation, as I think Jim Comey has done over the last few weeks on this book tour.
Well, do you think does he have any legal jeopardy himself, Director Comey?
Well, I think the best answer to that, Jason, will come with the release of the Inspector General report. We all anticipate that will happen shortly. We also know that the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, is someone who's proven himself to be a fair umpire, someone who calls balls and strikes fairly and was, where appropriate, willing to make a criminal referral of the deputy FBI director. I will tell you, not having seen the report, I'll be surprised if the Inspector General doesn't find misconduct by former Director Comey. I think he'll find that he violated his employment agreement made unauthorized disclosures of FBI documents, and whether they're classified or not, those are improper leaks. And I think he'll find that he made demonstrably false statements, as I think has been highlighted by some of the congressional transcripts that have been related recently as they conflict with some of the public interviews that he's been given. So I'm confident that if it's appropriate, Michael Horowitz will make that recommendation.
Chairman Gowdy, when do we expect to see this report? We keep getting delayed a little bit. You're going to hold, I believe, the first hearing. And what do you expect out of this? Do you think there will be any criminal referrals coming from this?
I don't know about the criminal referrals. You know, members of Congress, I've steadfastly tried to avoid accusing people of committing crimes. That was my old job. I don't know enough to do it. I know this. All three of us have tremendous confidence in Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General. He's a former federal prosecutor. He's a straight arrow. He just the very fact-centric. I think the reason it's taking longer, Jason, than he anticipated is he's finding more information. So what I would tell my colleagues in the House is give him the time and the independence and the resources to do everything he needs to do. I know that we wanted it in February and March, and that's human nature to want it quicker. But I want it to be complete, and I want it to be fulsome, and I want the American people to have confidence in what Horowitz has done. And if he can represent that he's accessed every document and every witness, I mean, stop and think. He found the page struck text, then he found the fact that some of them had been deleted, and then through his help, they were reconstructed. So I'm as impatient as everyone else. I know this. I want Horowitz to present a fulsome picture when he comes, and if that means waiting another couple of weeks, then so be it.
Do you have a date? Do we have a date when you're actually going to have that hearing?
We've set one, and then we moved it, and you remember how that used to be. We are shooting for the first week of June, but I will say with this caveat, and you know Horowitz, Jason, he's not giving me any updates on his investigation, nor should he, nor would I ask. I am simply saying we'd like to schedule the hearing, and I'll pick a date, and he'll tell me whether or not he thinks he's going to meet that target date or not, but I have no inside information, and I'm not supposed to.
Real quickly, Congressman Ratcliffe, in like 10 seconds, Director Mueller, how long do you think this continues to go on, and how would it impact the 2018 election, or will he wrap this thing up?
Well, I think he has to be very careful. I don't know. I don't want to put a specific date on it, but I think that Bob Mueller needs to be careful not to make the same mistake that both Republicans and Democrats criticized Jim Comey for, which was allowing an investigation to impact an election, which I think Republicans and Democrats agreed and happened in 2016.
Gentlemen, it's good to be on the air with you. It was an honor and privilege to serve with you in the Congress, and I thank you for joining us tonight. Coming up, even after President Trump's big week, Democrats and the media still won't give him credit. Stay with us as this special edition of Hannity continues.
We can't be fooled into giving the North Korean regime credit for returning Americans that never should have been detained in the first place. It is so troubling to hear President Trump say that Kim Jong-un treated the Americans excellently. Kim Jong-un is a dictator. He capriciously detained American citizens, robbed them of their freedom, didn't let them go home to their families. Their release should not be exalted, it should be expected. It is no great accomplishment of Kim Jong-un to do this. And when the president does it, he weakens American foreign policy and puts Americans at risk around the world.
Can never accept success for Donald Trump. Welcome back to this special edition of Hannity. That was Senator Schumer berating President Trump because he thanked Kim Jong-un for returning our hostages. Some Democrats and members of the mainstream media did give President Trump credit for his big success this week, but not all. According to FoxNews.com, MSNBC primetime programs spent just 30 seconds on American prisoners' return home from North Korea. 30 seconds. Joining us now with reaction is Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz and former Clinton pollster and Fox News contributor Doug Schoen, who's joining me here in studio in New York. Congressman, thank you for joining us here. Was America fooled? Senator Schumer? Was President Trump fooled? Is that the right word for Senator Schumer to use?
Well, it must be very embarrassing for the political left and the mainstream media that Dennis Rodman conducted more diplomacy in North Korea than the Obama administration ever did. And here we've got President Trump actually delivering results. So let's check the scoreboard. Under the Obama administration, we put 5 terrorists back on the battlefield to get the deserter Bo Bergdahl back. Here in the last week, President Trump goes and gets the 5 principal leaders of ISIS and takes them off the battlefield. At the same time, we're bringing home 3 Americans. So if you look at the results, if you look at the scoreboard, President Trump has America winning, and that's not something we were used to over the last 8 years.
Yes, and Doug, again, you're joining me here in studio. Listen, I remember candidate Barack Obama. He talked about the idea that, hey, listen, I would go meet with all these world leaders. And now you have President Trump not having to pay to bring home hostages through good, hard, tough negotiation and being able to say, hey, look, peace through strength has been his position. I mean, he does deserve some credit, or was he fooled like what Senator Schumer said?
No, look, he does. I say this as a Democrat, but Jason, first of all, as an American. And we got to stop the politics. We all, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, and conservatives, want and need a deal with North Korea. We need with Iran to work with our allies to make sure they do what President Rouhani said, stick to the terms of the deal. If they start enriching, tighten the sanctions. But this is an American set of issues. This isn't Democrat versus Republican. I praise Donald Trump as an American who's proud that the American president brought home the hostages.
Yeah, and to Congressman Gates, listen, are expectations too high with this meeting coming up with Kim Jong-un? I mean, you're not going to solve everything with one quick sit down, but the expectation seems to be so high now that what's your perspective on that?
Well, expectations are high because we are making progress. But just because we're making progress, it doesn't dictate or guarantee any type of result. In almost all of the comments that President Trump has made on the issue, he said, if there are not terms that are favorable to the United States, if there's not a verifiable way to ensure that North Korea cannot continue to do harm, then we'll get up and walk away. We're not going to make a bad deal. And that's one of the major differences in this administration and the last administration. The last administration made a bad deal with Iran. I think it's very timely that the president now is saying we're not going to do those bad deals anymore. We're going to enforce terms, and we're going to have enforceable terms, not secret side negotiations or documents that the Congress and the American people don't see. So I'm very encouraged, and I'm hopeful, but certainly there's no result that's guaranteed.
Doug, what's a reasonable expectation of success for the president going in here? I mean, what is reasonable?
What is reasonable is that we be on a path towards a verifiable deal that denuclearizes the Korean Peninsula. I think Representative Gates is right. We're not going to have a quick fix deal in 30 seconds. Obviously, we know that there's a lot of work that's done pre-summit to condition the playing field. The president has said rightly he'll leave if he doesn't find the negotiations productive. But this is going to take a while, and we have to be patient.
Real quickly, I want to give a shout out a little bit to our First Lady, Melania Trump. First of all, she's made me immensely proud. I think she's been a great and wonderful First Lady. She's taken care of Barron, which is in the toughest of circumstances. And I think she's a great representation of the United States. But she laid out this Be Best campaign, Congressman. What's your perspective of that?
Well, I think it's wonderful that the First Lady is reaching out to young people and encouraging them to be part of this great uplifting American experience with an improving economy, low unemployment rate, and also ensuring that we don't foster bullying in our schools, that we have an environment where young people feel safe and secure and able to prosper. And I think she is a wonderful representation of what the American dream can truly be for everyone who is here in our country if we all strive to be the very best version of ourselves.
Doug, what's the Democrats' perspective on the First Lady?
I think she is a symbol of great success, and to me, the benefits of immigration, legal immigration, and I hope we get a deal on DACA and the wall so we can move forward in a bipartisan way.
If you and I could work on it, I bet we could have it done by the end of the show. You and I could get that done by the end of the show, and it'd be very conservative, by the way.
And it would be fair and reasonable and would give the dreamers a pathway to staying here and, I dare say, citizenship.
That you've gone too far. All right. So, Congressman, thank you again for joining us. Doug, thanks again for being with us. Still to come, more on President Trump's major week concerning North Korea and Iran. as this special edition of Hannity continues.
At 2 o'clock in the morning, I had the incredible honor of greeting 3 brave Americans who had been held in North Korea, and we welcomed them back home the proper way. And on June 12th, in Singapore, I'll be meeting with Kim Jong-un to pursue a future of peace and security for the world, for the whole world. Do you remember everybody in the fake news where they were saying, he's going to get us into a nuclear war? He's going to get us into a nuclear war. And you know what gets you into nuclear wars? And you know what gets you into other wars? Weakness. Weakness. Among the many grave national security blunders of the previous administration, one of the world's worst was the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. A deal that would allow Iran to go right to the brink of nuclear weapons and ultimately, very quickly, have a nuclear weapon. I hope to be able to make a deal with them. A good deal, a fair deal, a good deal for them, better for them, better for them. But we cannot allow them to have nuclear weapons. We must be able to go to a site and check that site. We have to be able to go into their military bases to see whether or not they're cheating.
Welcome back to this special edition of Hannity, Trump's Big Week. That was President Trump talking about his administration's recent actions concerning Iran and North Korea. Iran is already showing its true colors after the president pulled us out of the nuclear deal. The rogue regime is reportedly saying it is ready to restart its nuclear program on a, quote, industrial scale. And earlier this week, lawmakers in Iran chanted death to America and burned United States flags. Joining us now with reaction to all this week's big foreign policy developments, our former counterterrorism advisor to Vice President Cheney and Florida congressional candidate Michael Waltz, author of Reaper, former Brigadier General Tony Tata, and author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World, Gordon Chang. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. Thanks. General, I want to start with you because when you see Iranians chanting that, that's not the people of Iran, that's the parliament or the government there, and burning the United States flags. But what's the implication of what Donald Trump did?
Well, Jason, there's an old saying that when you want it bad, you get it bad. And the Obama administration truly wanted this deal so badly, I assume because they didn't do anything else for 8 years. But this deal is the worst deal, and President Trump was right to get out of it. It's an economic boondoggle for Europe, which is why they're fighting so hard to stay in it. And so what we see is that Obama, at the very end of the deal, before it was signed, had Clapper, one of the most dishonest people in government at the time and still today, remove Iran from the state sponsor of terror list. And what that meant was that businesses could do trade with them, foreign aid could go to them, and arms could go to them, and meanwhile flushed Iran with billions of dollars of cash that immediately went to our enemies in the region, Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria, and the Palestinians that threatened our #1 ally, Israel. So this was a terrible deal, and it had very, very loose teeth in it. There was just no way to enforce it. And it's the reason Europe is fighting for it is because of economic boondoggle.
General, again, thank you for your service, and thank you to Michael Waltz also joining in his time in the military. I want to get your perspective. What is it that from the military standpoint, behind the scenes, they had to know that the president was going to make this move, but what is Secretary doing? What is the Defense Department doing to make sure that this doesn't spin out of control?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, that we have to militarily support our greatest ally in the region, and President Trump knows this, and our greatest ally is, of course, Israel. Secondarily, we have to have our military forces fitted and ready and equipped to be a credible use of military force. And what President Trump instinctively knows that President Obama never truly understood is that the credible use of military force is actually what helps diplomacy move forward. And then, finally, the Iran deal is incredibly important. It's a critical piece. But President Trump knows that is just a piece of a broader strategy against these dictatorships, and particularly against Iran. There's the terrorism piece, there's the missile piece, and that, that it's their economy, both the Iranian and the North Korean economy, that are their Achilles heels. And once we put our foot on the neck of their economies, these dictatorships will fold and they will come to the table. And finally, Jason, we can't forget that both North Korea and Iran are linked in so many ways. There have been North Korean chemical engineers in Syria. Don't forget that the Israelis bombed a North Korean-built nuclear reactor in Syria years ago that was also backed by Iran. These are linkages here, strategic linkages that Ambassador Bolton, President Trump, Secretary Mattis understand and know how to go after, and that's why you're seeing real results from the Trump administration.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask Gordon about. Gordon, you saw what we've been doing in North Korea, and you're such an expert on that. What is the message of North Korea, and how should the Iranians read what President Trump has done in North Korea, and how is that going to play in Iran?
Well, I'm sure that the Iranians understand that President Trump is willing to use force, and that has unnerved the Chinese, the South Koreans, and the North Koreans. And anything that unnerves the North Koreans is going to unnerve the Iranians, because as we know, these two programs, Iran and North Korea, they're linked. We have Iranian technicians in North Korea. The Iranian technicians have seen the North Korean nuclear detonations. They've been there. So these two regimes are joined at the hip. Iran's supposed to pay North Korea something like $2.5 to $3 billion a year for their various forms of cooperation. And that's a real indication that the two nations, the two regimes, are so close together.
General Tata, I want to ask you real quickly, and I got to go around the horn because we got to wrap up here, but what is the effect in Syria? Because you see a lot of actions by the Israelis, but what is the effect directly on what's going on the ground on Syria?
Well, if we impose new sanctions, as I predict we will do, and that was one of the impacts that the previous sanctions were having on Iran, is that the money was not flowing as strongly into Syria and to the other groups that I mentioned before, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Palestinians. And so you're going to see Syria be separated a little bit from Iran, and hopefully, strategically, the Trump administration, who is doing this artfully, as Michael said.
Michael, let me ask you, I got to bring in Michael here real quick because we got to wrap up.
Sure.
Michael, effect in Syria, 10 seconds.
Well, this is why we have to stay engaged. We have to support Israel. We have a relatively small footprint on the ground, but it's that long-term piece and that long-term strategy of how we roll back the gains the Iranians have made in the last 8 years of essentially the Obama administration turning its back on the Middle East.
Gentlemen, I wish I could spend the whole hour talking to you. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining us tonight. Coming up, more of this special edition of Hannity right after the break.